What's good, YouTube? Megasonic here with another YouTube video for your sub feeds. Now what's up? I want to talk about one thing and one thing only, is that we're reaching Walking Dead season finale for season 8, and they're just gonna get to the conclusion of All Out War, which in my opinion is one of the coolest story arcs in The Walking Dead. But now we're gonna have to sit down and talk about this one controversial thing that has pretty much killed this season for me, and that is the death of Carl Grimes. Now there has been fan reaction, cast reaction, and everyone generally having their own say to it, and most of it is negative, and I technically agree with most of it. I'm not a fan of the idea as well, but when listening to the show writers and everyone explain reason why they did this, it doesn't hold much water when you think of it as it doesn't make any sense for the overall story. Now hear me out. Before that, hit the like button, subscribe, hit that notification bell, because YouTube does not like to tell you guys when the next video is. Now let's dig deep in why Carl's death doesn't make any sense.
Don't be rude, Rick. We are having a conversation here.
So the first thing I want to cover about Carl's death is generally, it makes no sense from a story standpoint. Now, when you look into Carl's death, it has a lot of weight. It does try to push the story forward for season 8, but it doesn't really make any sense from a story standpoint, and I'll explain to you. The one thing I want to say about Carl is Carl represents one thing and one thing only, and that is the future of The Walking Dead and the main objective for Rick Grimes. Now, to look at the future of The Walking Dead, Carl's development as a character is what's steering the show. Rick, yeah, is there, but even Robert Kirkman has said, like, Rick is going to eventually kick the bucket sooner or later. He's just, when he's done with the character, and that's when he decides to start planning to death. But Carl was a symbol of a brighter future. Like, the Walking Dead comic book is still going on, and Carl's still alive, and he has made strides in his character development, and AMC's pretty much taken a backseat from this. And it makes zero sense, because when you're technically kind of cutting off the future for your show. Imagine this, imagine we're on season 14 of The Walking Dead. Rick and Andrew Lincoln has, got killed off from the show. Rick is gone. And then they start promoting the new main character, Chandler Riggs, as Carl Grimes. It would still have more flavor. It would still be an interesting show. But generally, the show had a future. You had something to keep pushing it. And that is the development of Carl. Now, when you look at it from another angle, which is it makes no sense for Rick Grimes' storyline, and I'm gonna explain to you why. When you look at the Rick Grimes character and everything he has done throughout the plot, the one thing that they always covered is the fact that Rick Grimes does everything and anything in this plot just to make sure Carl's safe. Like, okay, let's sit down and take a look at the war. What's the reason why Rick is really fighting this war? It's to protect Alexandria, it's to make a better living for everyone, and it's also to take down an oppressive group of the saviors, but generally, it's also in the long run is going to help Carl and Judith. For example, if they get rid of Negan and the saviors are not a problem, and then he can build a great trade route amongst the other towns and neighboring areas, he doesn't have to deal with Carl and Judith going hungry, and he doesn't have to deal with them going out to help find food and most likely getting killed. And Rick's whole idealism is generally he is a father. He's doing everything to protect his freaking children. Other than everyone else in the group he cares about, Carl and baby Judith are his main goals. Like, I do believe that if it was up to him, if Michonne was getting attacked by zombies and Carl was getting attacked by zombies, it doesn't matter how much he loves Michonne, he would generally leave her to die to save Carl. And like I said before, Carl, it represents the future of The Walking Dead. So when you start killing off Carl, you're generally cutting off Rick's main objective. You're pretty much keeping the main character from ever achieving his goal, because you killed his entire family. Essentially, when you think about it, baby Judith is not his blood relative. He's still his daughter, like, he still considers her his daughter, even though it's Shane and Lori's kid. But Carl was his own blood, and he had more of a closer bond because Carl is his firstborn, and Carl's dead now. Rick has really no real relatives left in The Walking Dead. Comic book Rick still has Carl, but TV show Rick legit has nobody like that shares that one thing, and that is a blood relative. So generally, when you take away Carl, you're generally taking away Rick's main objective as a character. It's, for example, imagine if, like, let's say, for example, like this. Let's go to Batman. So let's look at Batman. Imagine Gotham, like, it's after, like, years of being bad Batman, Gotham generally has like a weird drop in like crime. Like it drops severely, like way more. Like Joker's not around, Joker's dead, or Penguin, everyone is still in jail. Some people are being rehabilitated, some people are getting better help for whatever had happened in Arkham Asylum. Like all these things are generally benefiting the city. Eventually, at one point, Bruce Wayne is going to hang up the cape and cowl because he doesn't necessarily see Gotham needing him anymore. And essentially, you're taking away that one aspect of the character, and that is Batman and Gotham are kind of like how Rick and Carl is. Whether how Batman wants to protect Gotham and hope for a better future, Rick wants to do the same for Carl. And when you take that away from him, you're pretty much taking a lot away from that character. And generally from a story standpoint, you're literally hurting your future as well as hurting your main character in the process.
Father's job is to protect his son.
Now, before getting into my second point, I generally want to focus on one aspect that Walking Dead covers: how the apocalypse affects the mind of young children. And we see this in many ways. We've seen this in the development of Mika, we've seen this in the newer characters in season 7 and 8, we've seen this in Eden. We generally see these sort of philosophies these children build to sort of survive in this world because, well, they're still young and new, and that's one of the reasons why I love kids in apocalypse stories. They're generally, kids usually don't have to deal with these types of adult making decisions, and now they do, because it's either life or death. And one character that really explored that the most is Carl. Carl essentially, you have to think of it from this standpoint. Carl grew up all the way to the age of 12 years old. Well, if you want to get particular, 7 years old in the comic, 12 years old in a television show. But generally, he all argued that he was pretty damn young. He was not even in high school yet when the zombie apocalypse happened. And exceptionally, when the zombie apocalypse happened, he heard also that his father was shot and they have to evacuate the city. So generally, Carl had to deal with a lot of things, and it did shape his mindset. Eventually, he did get Rick and everyone back, but he witnessed a lot of things. He witnessed his own mother's death, which he had to put her down. He witnessed someone who thought close to his family almost tried to murder his father. He has witnessed several things that most kids his age hasn't even witnessed. So when you bring those sort of aspects and experiences he has went through and throughout the show, you have to start echoing that in his character. And it makes no sense why Carl from season 7 is all Rambo, then season 8 he's all Gandhi. Let me explain. So generally in the beginning of season 7, we pick up where season 6 left off and the introduction of Negan. Now we see Negan pretty much torture the group, and we see after all that with the death of Glenn and Abraham, and generally just seeing Rick having to kind of throw his pride out the window, ensuring the safety of Carl and everyone else. You generally see as a viewer that this affects Carl mentally. Carl feels that Rick has pretty much bent over and taken it from Negan, and he starts thinking of wild things. Many characters start thinking of similar aspects like Rosita, but Carl starts thinking of ways to risk his life in order to take out Negan. Now, what does this mean? Generally, Carl is all about guns blazing at this point, and it makes sense because he witnessed 2 of his closest allies, people that he can consider even family at this point, get murdered right in front of him, and generally saw his dad break down from the cold, tough, intelligent exterior to a blubbering fucking coward. And that really takes effect on Carl. You can tell this does. Carl generally accepts the fact that Rick might have to cut his arm off, which Rick can't even fathom the idea of hurting his own son. And we see this affect Carl one way, and that is he's constantly planning to attack the Saviors. Now, he also sees how the Saviors generally kind of ransacks their homes and attacks them during episode 4, so he does come to that conclusion that maybe if I kill Negan, they would generally lose their leader, it will be out of order, we could take over. But Carl's whole personality in this season generally makes sense because he has witnessed some dark things in the past few days in the show's time frame. But when you then go to season 8, where Carl is saving this one person during the time of a war and is doing everything in his power trying to convince Rick that think of the brighter future, think of the way the world would change, think of all the great positive things. It's a weird switch because there isn't a situation or an event in season 7 that changes Carl to this perspective. It's kind of just happened. It was kind of awkward from season 7 where he was just shooting a bunch of junk people and saviors, to then later he's all about let's protect this one person even though we're in the middle of a freaking war. And it makes no sense for that character point. There's no situation between it. Now there's a way to do it to make it much cleaner, and I can explain it right now. One thing you do is you have Carl pretty much regret the deaths that he caused when he tried to kill Negan. So for those who don't know, who don't feel like watching the episode, generally Carl stages a suicide mission to go take out Negan. It's obviously it fails, they upperhead find him, they capture him, and instead of Negan beating Carl or torturing Carl, similar to how he has been doing to Daryl, he decides to take Carl, pretty much show him around the place. Like, this is probably my opinion one of the greatest Carl moments, because it also shows Negan's intrigue, like his whole interest in Carl, because generally Carl is an interesting kid. But when you start bringing in the fact that he's now being pretty much welcome as a guest, which is something that not even most of the saviors can fathom, and then you have him go back home, and this sort of weird situation where Negan is waiting for Rick, pretty much tell Rick and show Rick that, hey, I'm trying to show you I'm a good guy, but I don't want to kill nobody. Generally, Negan's trying to show that Rick that he can be reasonable at times, and generally kind of keep Rick on his side for most of the 7. Where you can do this where you see the deaths of Olivia and Spencer, and you can have that constantly affect Carl's psyche. If Carl didn't decide to attack the sanctuary, none of this would have happened. Negan would have no real reason to go check on Rick's group, which then would leave Olivia and Spencer alive. Spencer would not be talking to Negan, and Negan pretty much won't look down on Spencer. Rosita wouldn't try to shoot Negan in anger for Spencer's death, and Eugene would generally still be the group. And you can have that affect Carl's psyche in the second half of season 7. It makes a lot of sense to do that because, well, Carl can learn that his actions have larger consequences now. And this would have been great for Carl's personality because he's learning more about how his actions can affect others that you may not even think in ways. Generally, Eugene is captured, Rosita almost got killed, 2 people got killed, and generally you have Carl blame himself for it because, well, he's the reason why Negan's there in the first place. So when you bring that into season 8, it feels like a natural progression, because maybe you can have Carl be one of those people who are just like, maybe we don't have to kill all the saviors, or maybe we decide to find some way to work with them. Generally, Carl knows that violence can lead to more issues, and they're working on a better future. I know this final point may sound very nerdy and kind of contrived, but it's, to be honest, my third and final point is that it spits on Carl's future character development. And I'm going to explain a lot from the comic books, which is not even, unless you are reading the comic books, then I apologize, but if you're not, you're going to hear me out for this one. So when you look at The Walking Dead, and like I said all before, that Carl's the future, and Carl's learning that his actions have bad repercussions, that is all shown in the next storyline after All Out War, which is New Beginning. New Beginning generally is like a new storyline, a fresh sort of start for The Walking Dead. It jumps a good amount of years in the future, and we see every character that kind of like has to change physically, emotionally, mentally. Generally, everyone's in like a sort of spot where peace has really taken a toll on them because everyone's generally living in times of like bliss. There's no villain at this point. Nothing has happened, so Rick and the gang are pretty much all enjoying their time, trying to like build up their nation and build up their trade route, and it just shows how much the progression they take in this storyline. So the one character that really benefits from the storyline is Carl, because Carl essentially becomes the main character for Walking Dead a little bit, and his character goes on this sort of journey where you see him change from this sort of like cold-hearted killer to more of a leader. And it starts off with one character only, and that is Lydia. Now Lydia, I'm not going to explain too much in detail, but generally she's part of the enemy team at the time. She's part of the enemy squadron. I'm not going to explain who they are, but you know, people in the comment section are going to explain who they are. But Lydia generally serves as one thing, as Carl sort of like coming to age. And generally, I'm not saying physically, because Carl does come to age. It's kind of gross. Like when you think of it, he's like only like 15 in the comic book, and he's just like banging the mess out of a 16-year-old girl in the comic book, and it just feels awkward. But generally, when you get into this storyline, Carl's generally learning on how to be a man. We generally see him deal with these situations very different. We also see that some of Negan's personalities also leaking over to Carl. We're generally seeing that all these actions and all these things that have happened to Carl at a young age is starting to take a toll on him. You can tell, like, for example, at one point, these dudes jump. Let's say if we're watching the show version of it, Carl wants to become a blacksmith. Him and Rick go to the hilltop. He decides to live with Maggie a little bit. He then gets apprenticeship at the blacksmith. You know, everything's going good, and then these two goons that Eden has had trouble with in the past, you know, start picking on the kid and she kind of jumps on him, and they see Carl, they back down. But then later on that day, they decide to attack Carl, Eden. In the comic it's Sophia, but in this version it's Eden, and they knock Carl in the back of the head with a brick, which Carl then runs around. And this is interesting because we see that Carl's adapting Rick's sort of tactical fighting style, which is generally not just like jumping at the person, but generally faking them out. So he kind of like fakes them out, tends to run away, then goes find a shovel and starts beating the holy hell out. Like, he beats these people like they owe him money. Like, he beats like one dude to like near death. Carl was. But we see Carl generally start showing versions of Shane, Rick, Negan, and the Governor. Dreams, all these people who have affected his life in some way, some form, are starting to take a toll on him. And we later see this when the parents of those kids start reacting to Carl, and Carl sort of just like responds to them in the most Negan way as possible, with a bunch of curse words, a bunch of FUs, and a bunch of smirky comments. And we can see that these characters are taking a large, he's adapting these people's personalities. And generally, yeah, kids are like sponges. They kind of like just attach to anything they hear. But Carl is attaching to personality aspects, which is really cool, and is also developing him into this really interesting character. Now it gets more in detail when we see during the whole big battle in the hilltop at the time, Carl kind of leads the hilltop people out of the situation they're in, and we see sort of that Rick side leaking out, that sort of leadership, that sort of power, and we see that Carl is destined to do great things in the story. And one thing they show about it is that they separate him from Rick. He's not under Rick anymore. He's generally on his own when he's at the hilltop. He's a young kid learning how to be a blacksmith, but also is helping out around the place, rebuilding the hilltop, doing all these things, and he's not under Rick's wing. And Rick is generally dealing with another person at this time and dealing with a number of other things. But generally, when we look at this storyline and we look at everything I just explained, it will really make you think that why would AMC decide to do that? It makes zero sense, because Carl's personality and his story arc gets like a whole jump in character development when you bring in the New Beginning. And for those who don't know when the New Beginning is coming, that's the story in the next season. So literally they killed Carl before his big sort of breakout role in the story. Makes you think how stupid the idea was now.
For peace. But it's too late for that.
So yeah, thanks for watching, guys. I did go into detail about why Carl's death makes no sense in any way or form. It doesn't make sense from the story standpoint, it doesn't make sense for his character, and generally it spits on the future development of the character. So generally, if you like this video and you want to do more, I'm happy to do more videos where I kind of talk and fix and generally go in detail of things I didn't like. More of a heavier critique video. Then feel free to subscribe. I might do more of them in the future, who knows. I might do some one for the DC expanded universe, who knows. Probably this month, probably in May, who knows. But anyway, remember to like and subscribe and share this video out with everyone you know and love. I'm Megasonic Reviews. I see you guys later. Enjoy the season finale.